and it was very lovely there. I stayed in the condo of the facilitator, Cheryl Birch, who was formerly vice president for, oh, don't photograph me, just the.
Thank you. In case you haven't noticed, I talk a little funny, but quite honestly, where I live, we had never noticed that until some of you guys pointed that out to us. So I guess at some point in time, I'm going to try to rectify that, though I don't know exactly how that's going to happen, because I've lived all over the world. I've spent a great deal of time in Texas, so you can sort of combine the twang between Texas and Georgia. And I'm truly from Georgia and lived a lot in Texas. One of my children was born in Texas. But I've lived in Europe, I've lived in Asia, I've traveled all over, I've lectured all over. So that's the funny thing about me. I must be like a chameleon in a lot of ways, because if I'm in an area long enough, all of a sudden I start talking like you do. Or is that reversed? If I talk long enough, will you talk the way I do? I don't know. That could be dangerous, couldn't it? You know, I was listening to your stories as we were beginning, and I have to say to you that I am so very honored to be in the presence of so many gifted, extraordinary individuals. And even those of you that did not feel you had much to say, someone hit the nail on the head when they said, you know, you are actually an extraordinary being in a physical existence. And truly you are. And I don't really know any more than you do. Isn't that interesting? I don't really know any more than you do, but I'm more plugged in today and have been all of my life, only because that's what I'm supposed to do. And the fact that you're not plugged in and you don't remember as much as I do is part of your experience. It was a choice. It was a decision that you made before you were born to come in sometimes in an unknowing capacity so that you will learn through the evolvement. Or for some of you, falling out of a tree and getting banged up a bit, that sort of shook you and has been part of your awakening process. And my goodness, Diane has had her experience, but even recently, from the way she described it to me, it sort of sounded like if we had had a sheet of glass or ice, and she had ran in and did a home run, slide in on her tummy with her arms stretched out wide, and then ran square into a pole. I don't know if that means Diane's a little bit hard-headed and just needs a good conk on the head once in a while or what. But I've sure had my own fair share of those. So whatever happened that day, I think you're still reeling from it just a little bit, aren't you, Diane?
Yeah.
Still trying to figure out exactly what happened.
I feel like I'm being rewired.
She thinks she's being rewired. Okay. Well, as Diane said, my name is Judy Goodman. I'm a mother. I'm a grandmother. I am a unique individual in this regard. I was born walking in both worlds and have done so every single day of my life. I don't know it any differently. And it does have a high degree of accountability to me. It has a high degree of responsibility to me. And while I think that anyone that does what I do ought to really take themselves very seriously and realize that the words that we speak can change and affect or impact other people's lives. And what I know about your journey through death and when you get to the other side and the things that you go through, I know that there is a moment of reckoning, a moment of accountability. And if I have said something wrong, if I have deliberately misled you or altered your path in any way, guess what? I will be called into your presence at that time, and I will have to respond to what I did. So while I like to have fun at what I do, I take this very, very seriously. It's who I am. It's what I'm all about. And even though I have seen spirit all of my life, I see energy, I can see all of the spirit guides and the angels that came in with each of you. The one interesting thing about this is that at a time like this, what will happen is they will withdraw, and they are lined up around the room, shoulder to shoulder, and it's almost as if we were in a medical amphitheater, because if you could see it the way I do, there is no ceiling, and there's an amphitheater above us where spirits are seated, and they are learning and sharing and growing, just exactly the way you are. Perhaps you never thought about it this way, but just because you die and cross over, just because you go back home, just because you go to the place from which you came, you still learn and you still grow. And those that are in spirit around you probably are there because they are learning and they are growing. Some of them may be loved ones. Some of them may be relatives that you've already lost. Some of them may be spirit guides that have actually traveled with you before. That does happen. So today we're going to talk about a lot of things. And even though I've walked in spirit all of my life and walked in physical all of my life, I'm not exempt from learning. I'm not exempt from growing. I'm not exempt from having my own fair share of knocks on the head. Probably took more to get my attention than it would Diane, I don't know. So I've had my own fair share of experiences. Some of those I'm going to share with you today. For 7 years of my life, I was living in Texas. I was still married at the time. For 7 years, I had major surgery every single year. Almost to the day, every year. Valentine's Day. Now, isn't that a crock? You know, it's just no fun. You think about the Heart Day and all of those kinds of things. You want to think in terms of celebrating a little bit differently, and here I am lying on the table once again, going under the knife with general surgery, general anesthesia. Even I have to ask questions, even though when I'm with someone, the holograms of their life starts playing in front of me. And please don't misunderstand, you're not really a complete open book to me. If you did not want me to know something about you, the rights of privacy reign in spirit just as they do here, although there's always going to be someone who's strong enough to get beyond that if they need to in order to help you or protect you or to save you from something that would be harmful from you. But when I'm with people, holograms will start playing. The movies of your life and your experiences will play. So it's not that I'm a mind reader, and maybe I'm not even all that smart, but I know a good movie when I see one, and some of you have some good movies. It didn't take me long to walk through that crowd just a few minutes ago and decide, I better get back inside, or I could stay here for a day. There's some good experiences going on with this group. But even though I can see those kind of things and know those sort of experiences for you, I don't get to know all of the answers for me. That really wouldn't be fair, would it? Because really and truly, if you come down to it, this is Life 101. Gee, what a bummer. Life 101. You're here by choice, and it is an opportunity to learn and to grow, and it is a gift. Your life here, however painful it may be, however many trees you may have fallen from, how many experiences you may or may not have had, it is still a gift to be here. And even for me, having had 7 major surgeries and being clinically dead for 7 minutes and then lying in a coma for 7 days, it's still a gift. But I have my lessons to learn too. I have an opportunity to learn and grow, even though I am here to awaken the sleepers and to teach the teachers. And I look at you and I don't see students. I see teachers. I see each of you as having this extraordinary capacity, this extraordinary ability to reach out and touch other people's lives in wonderful ways. I have been blessed in the last few days that I've already been here to meet a number of you. I have seen incredible energy moving from one person to other people. You know, it's just been a great thing to be able to be here with people that are following their instincts and their intuitions and doing what they should do. So I'm really and truly, I'm very honored to be here, and I'm very blessed to be in your presence. Let me move to the point of me having to learn. I don't get to know all the answers for me. As I said, life is life 101, and you're here to learn and grow, as I am, even though I'm here to teach and do other things. I'm not exempt from learning. And quite honestly, it's sort of like taking a test or a course of study. If you had all the answers, would you take the test? I wouldn't. We're probably all pretty guilty of that at some point in time, is that we decide, if I know the answers, then why do the work? And so I'm precluded from knowing all of those things for me. So I really did not know that I was going to be facing 7 years of surgery, and I did not really know that I was going to die. But I did get a premonition after I'd gone through one after the other, it finally sunk in. There's got to be more to this than meets the eye. No cancer, nothing that you thought would have killed me, although what finally got me to the table and to the experience was an intestinal blockage. But even I had to let a few of these sink in before I started asking the right questions. So, when you're having experiences in your life, ask questions. What is this about? What can I learn? What opportunity is here in front of me that I might be missing? It took me a while. We do things a little slower in the South. We're the only people that can take a 2-syllable word and make it become 6 to 8 syllables. There's an old joke that floats around down south, and I swear to God, I think some of you guys started it. The joke goes, why do girls in the South get pregnant on their first dates earlier than girls from the North would get pregnant on those first dates or first experiences? Why the girls in the South, why does it happen to them more than it does to other girls? Well, that's easy to figure out. It takes us a whole lot longer to say, quit. Anyway, we'll catch on sooner or later. 6 surgeries behind me. The eve of the 7th surgery, the light's beginning to go off, and I said, Father, you got to talk to me. I've got to know what this is about. This body is not going to continue to take this much longer. What is it that I'm missing? And please, always ask these questions. Don't wait as long as I did. As I said, we do it slower in the South. You don't have to do that. You're living in the right place. And I asked that question, why? What is this all about? Now, I'm not here to talk about your religion. I honor all religions. I honor those that don't practice a religion. Doesn't matter to me. But when I use the word God or Father, the word that I use most often is Father, and that is only an expression of my religious beliefs, which I am very religious, but I'm not here to speak of religion, but I'm just saying that so that you know where I'm at. And so I'm talking, and I said, Father, you've got to talk to me. I've got to know why I am continuing to have these surgeries. What is it that I'm missing? And it was the first time that I'd ever cried about any of the experiences. And I really wasn't crying because I felt sorry for myself. I was crying because I felt that I was missing something that was truly important, and I did not want to miss what was occurring. And in a voice as clear as anything that I've ever heard, Father spoke to me, and he simply said, did you not ask to work in healing? Bingo. Instantly, I knew what it was about. If you don't remember many things from today, remember this. You cannot give people what you don't have, and you cannot take them where you have not been. If you're going to work in energy and move energy and touch people's lives, then you have to have that energy, you have to have that experience, you have to have a knowing of your ability to do it. Sometimes that knowing is not in our everyday conscious self, but it's in our higher self, and that information will filter down and allow you to move into the right place. You cannot give people what you don't have, and you cannot take them where you haven't been. One of my passions in this life is to talk to people about death and dying. I have a lot of material that's available. One thing that we are It came out first in audiobook, and it's being transcribed by a lady in Denver right now. It's called Death, Our Journey of Life. And it talks about what it's like to die, what the experience is before, during, and after. And one of the things that I like to teach to people is about the 7 levels on the other side. Those levels have names. They can be identified. You can talk about them. You can understand who lives on that particular level, what happens there, whether it's the realm of angels or the realm of new white light. You cannot take people where you haven't been. If you have not been through the veil of death, if you haven't come back, if you have not had that experience, and we've all died many, many times, then you cannot help people to understand that. And a passion of mine is to help people not be afraid to die. It is the most natural of all of the things that we do. It is as natural as breathing. It is only a transition. It is not an abyss. You do not just simply stop breathing and there is nothing else. It is the place that you came from, that you're returning to. For many of us, we will start to see friends and relatives before we cross over. For many of us, we will hear music, we will see lights. We hear a lot of stories about the proverbial tunnel of white light, profound music, angels there, spirits being around. But what I find is that everyone's experience is just a little bit different and is more orchestrated to meet your particular needs. What is it that you need? What will make this event be the right and appropriate thing for you? My upbringing was in the deep South, almost over close to Savannah, Georgia. And so I chose to be born in a place where I would understand a lot about organized religion, a lot of prejudice issues, a lot of different things. And I chose this very, very carefully because there was a lot about life and humanity that I needed to know because I intended to touch the lives of a lot of people during this journey. My father's mother was very, very devoutly religious, so much so that she was in the church every time the doors were open. And I swear if the column out front had fallen, she would have been there holding the roof up somehow. She was a member of the Church of God. Now, I'm not saying this to offend anyone. I am simply sharing with you a true story. My grandmother was so devoutly religious and so in tune to her faith that she would have never said a thing that was not true. It just would not have occurred to her to do that. And she, based on her religious beliefs, the box of religion as she understood it, and as she elected to live her life, her religion taught her that when she died, she would cross the River Jordan, she would go up to the pearly gates, St. Peter would be standing there, and she would knock on the door, and she would ask to come in. And if St. Peter found her name on the list somewhere, she would get in. Well, if anybody had a right to be there, my grandmother had the right because she lived that kind of life. Before my grandmother died, she had never spoken an untrue word that I had ever known anything about, nor had she ever talked about spiritual things the way I do. Oh, I might have been a thorn in her side for sure. But the funniest thing is before she died, being devoutly true to what is true, she took me aside and she spoke to me before she died and she said, I want to tell you a few things. After my grandfather passed away, he would come back and visit Grandma. And this was in the days where you had the feather beds, the feather mattresses, the feather comforters, so it would be very high and very poofy. And Grandma was telling me how Granddaddy would come and she could see the indentation of where he sat on the side of the bed. Now imagine a woman who would have never spoke about anything spiritual, finally crossing over that religious edge and talking about things that were very true. But she said Granddaddy would come back and sit on the side of the bed, and she could feel the warmth of where he sat. And he came and stayed with her almost every day. He would come and visit. He would stay with her and talk to her. They had a farm, and Granddaddy was telling Grandma how to raise the 14 children he'd left her with. My father was one of 14. So maybe that's why he died, I'm not sure. Well, Grandma shared with me that she had seen these things. She also talked to me about orbs of light that used to come around the property. Sometimes you hear about those. They get called or identified in a lot of different ways. Sometimes people will say they're angels. Sometimes people will say it's a sign that someone in the family is about to die. There's a lot of different kinds of explanations. But if you could see spirit the way I see spirit, you would understand that in our truest form, we are pure energy. We come into this physical body, we occupy it, but when we leave it, we will maintain or hold an image that is comfortable to us for a while, but the higher our vibration, the higher we raise ourselves up to be, the less we are inclined to hold that image. So in our truest state, we are like a little ball of sun, a little light. And so I suspect, though I don't know for sure, I suspect that the orbs that Grandma saw just happened to be some of the family coming by to check on her, maybe even Granddaddy, maybe some of the children that she had already lost in her life. But even Grandmother, in her very steep religious concept of life, she had decided, based on religion, that she would have to swim and cross the river and go to Victor and knock and so forth. And I was able to view that experience for her. I was able to watch what actually happened when she died. And do you know, as her religion taught her, that's exactly what happened. She did exactly what she had learned until she got through the pearly gates, went inside this building, and she sort of shook her head and looked around and she said, "Wow, I don't believe I did that." You see, those experiences were part of her lesson in this life. And we have a preconceived notion of what living and dying is all about. And if your idea of dying and going to the other side is to have the perfect game of golf, why, the good news is there's no need for a scorecard. You'll have the best handicap ever. You'll play the best game you've ever had. So it can happen exactly that way. If your idea of heaven or crossing over is to sit in a boat and fish and catch the big one that always got away, you'll do that. Until all of a sudden you realize that was only part of the facade, only part of the game, only part of the lesson, only part of the experience. And sort of like Grandma, you'll say, "Wow, I can't believe I did that." And then you'll simply move on into your higher state of evolvement, and you'll get right back into knowing all the answers to every question that you might ask today. No matter what question you ask. What was one very profound question a gentleman raised early? I want to know, because he had a simple question. I want to know who we are, why we're here, and what was the other part of that?
Where we're going.
Where we're going. Oh, it was you. Okay. Well, that's a good question. The interesting thing is there's a part of you that already knows that. There's a part of you that exists just up and outside of your body. Not the aura, but it's your higher self. It's that part of you that is always fully attached to the source, by whatever name you choose to call it, but you are all the time connected. And your higher self is always not emotionally involved in your life. It has all the wisdom and all the answers. And you know what? We women get credit for being really good at that, because women have good instincts and they usually trust them. And throughout life, in a lot of ways, we've sort of taught men how to play that down. So, you know, they don't do it quite as quick as we do, but women, oh, they instinctively know when their husbands are somewhere where they ought not to be, or they know if the children weren't at the playground the way they were supposed to be doing, or no, you did not do that homework either. We trust those instincts. We allow that higher self to be more fully connected, and we pull on that unbiased knowledge that's there. And every single person here has that knowledge, has that ability. And in your prayer, in your meditation, perhaps one of the things that you would do would be to say, I give myself permission to be more fully connected to my higher self, which means you are looking for the highest knowledge and highest truth, that you are looking for it through yourself. See, I think that you need to trust yourself a whole lot quicker than you trust me or anyone else. I believe your best answers come from inside of you because you and I are of the same. We came from the same burst of energy. There is no difference except the experience that we are having right now. That's the only difference in us. Trust that. And always use discernment. Always use discernment. When you have the privilege, as you do with this group, of hearing a lot of very gifted speakers, you have the ability to touch in on a lot of points of view, a lot of interesting facts, a lot of very interesting things. Always use discernment. Take from whatever you hear what rings true for you, and if it does not ring true beyond that, then cast it off and forget about it. You can't agree with everyone all the time. Life is not that way. It's not intended to be that way. So it's always a good idea to use discernment and to question. And that's not offensive at all. It's a good thing for you to do. I like to have interactive lectures, and I'm going to talk in a moment. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own near-death experience. I'll get back to that. But I think one of the things that I want to share most with you today is how I helped my daddy die. And no, my name's not Kevorkian. But before I go further, I want to stop and just ask if there are any questions at all, briefly, on anything that I've said at this time, because I don't like for us to get too far down the road with anything and then say, I wish that I had asked that question, or I wish you had come back to it, because there's a lot of things coming at me from all of you that are here, and it would be real easy to get distracted. So I don't want to go too far without pausing for just a moment to say, does anyone have any questions about something that I have spoken about so far? Nothing else, only what we've spoken about so far.
I'm very interested in how you lived your life, one foot in and one foot out, and how, when you meet people, how do you see people just on a personal basis?
What is it like being who I am?
Yes.
Okay. Quite honestly, I don't see it as a burden, only in that I realize the burden of being as honest and as truthful with people at all times as I can possibly be. But even though I can see things, hear things, know things, smell things, touch things in ways that perhaps you're not doing in this life, I don't see it as a burden only because it's been with me since the day I was born. I don't know it any other way. So I don't know how to feel that it's a burden. Now, it might be for someone else, but it just does not work that way for me. I knew, even as a small child, I knew that I was different, and I knew that there was a knowledge, an understanding, an awareness with me that was not with the little friends that I was playing with. But I really did not know what that difference was, and I did not understand just how that difference would play itself out until I was 9 years old. And it was a Saturday, and there were a parade of events that happened on that particular Saturday, and there may be some monumental reason that it was that day, though I don't remember. But it was that day that I saw how different I was. I understood what it meant to be different. As I was a little child, I had two little angels that played with me. I was a child. I didn't know what else to call them. I called them Angel and Pretty Flower. They're still around. There are 31 in spirit that walk with me night and day. They're not here to give me answers. They wouldn't even try, because they know that I would not accept the answers from them. I believe in going to the top. I've always believed that. And I believe that you should too. And I believe that the knowledge that I step into, the source of all knowledge that I access when I am teaching and when I am talking, I really do believe that it's available to each of us. not just me, but to you too. I might be utilizing or accessing it differently than you, but I do believe that you could get to it. And I believe in your own prayer and meditation and your quiet times, I believe that you can get to that knowledge. So I don't believe that that makes me unique and exclusive. So it doesn't feel like a burden. I do understand the accountability of it. I've always known that. I've always been more mature for my age than most children. My teachers all loved me. I was a good student. I didn't find out until much later that when I was born, I weighed 11 pounds. I think my mom has had a grudge against me since then. I played with my little friends, and I could see the little spirits and the little angels that were around them that were playing with them. Do you know that every one of us, when we're born, we come in with the light in our eyes. We see things, we're remembering things. And then slowly, many times by well-meaning clergy, well-meaning teachers, well-meaning parents, who tell us, honey, you know you really don't have an imaginary playmate. No, there's not a man up in the room pacing back and forth. You know, whatever it is, well-meaning people in our lives will help to start shutting that down, or either it simply is part of our life and we start shutting it down. I just was aware when the light started going out in my little friend's eyes. I could see the light start to dim. When a person is approaching their physical death in this life, do you know the light starts going out? Have you ever noticed that? You can see when the light is starting to be turned off. But as my friends begin to grow up, and when that light turned off in their eyes, not the light of death, but just the light of awareness, the light of knowing, they stopped seeing their little spirits. And I kept on seeing mine, and I could see theirs. So that's part of what it's been like to grow up. I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I have 2 children, I have a son and a daughter. Both of my children are gifted, though they will never use their gift in the way that I do. It was not intended. But they needed to come to a gifted parent that would not circumvent that process for them. I have 2 grandchildren. I'm a really good Mimi. I'm called Mimi. I'm a really good Mimi. And Matthew and John, Matthew is a 7-year-old. When he was 6 years old, he said to his mama, Mama, will you take me to the circus? And she said, yes, baby, I will, but I didn't really know that you knew that much about circus. He said, yeah, Mama. He said, you know, when I was in heaven before I came to you, I was watching you, and Mimi took you to the circus, and you laughed and you had fun, so I want you to have fun again. Out of the mouths of these little babes, you know. And while I can feel the burden of things that I know, I can feel the burden of 2 tall buildings in New York crumbling to the ground. I can feel the burden of Columbine. I can feel the burden of Kuwait, of Africa, of places in our own country where we have people walking on the street and pushing a cart. And sometimes they don't even have the cart. I do feel that burden, and it pains me a great deal. I think the only thing that keeps me sane at times is that when I see such an event, I have the ability to go beyond the event, and I go back into the Akashic records, or I go back to the point of beginning of that particular story, and I look to see why it came about, so that I can understand, so that I can release the burden. I don't know what it is about me, but I wind up being in the most unusual places at the most unusual times because I have an ability to recalibrate energy where I go. Within hours after Princess Diana was killed, I was in England. On the same day that Columbine happened, I was there. It had literally been written into my daytimer 2 months before the event occurred. And I was supposed to do a TV show that afternoon and speak at the Civic Center that evening. And my friend who owns most of the funeral homes in Denver said, Judy, everybody loves you here. Would you come and be a motivational speaker and, you know, not do the woo-woo stuff, but just kind of motivate them? Would you do that? And that was why I was supposed to be there, is I was going to be a motivational speaker to his employees without the woo-woo stuff. Although they all knew it anyway. Well, in my appointment book, that appointment is written there, but as it turned out, I did not do the motivational lecture. Did the TV shows, a lecture downtown at the Civic Center that night, but within hours, I left Houston where I was doing some more work, and I wound up being in Denver within hours of the Columbine event. And I was on the property, and then I went into the funeral home where 6 of the bodies were. And one of the perpetrators' body was also there. And my friend, knowing who I am, allowed me to be a little bit more involved in that scenario than another person might have been. But that's just the kind of event that I don't take it at face value. I know there's always something bigger than all of us behind these major life-changing events. And so that's just another one of those events that I went into to try to find out what the answers were. What was the reason behind all of it? When the events happened with Jim Jones, was not that curious about it at the time, but later I began to be concerned about why would that many people leave their country, give up so much of their lives, go into another place, and all die at the same time. So I went back into the Akashic Records and looked to find out what that was about. So there's a certain amount of burden in being the person that I am. But I love to laugh and I love to play. There's never a time that you'll find me without a kite in the back of the trunk of my car. And I am just as likely to be driving down the highway and pull over and walk into somebody's field or in their yard or whatever and throw a kite up in the air and fly the kite. I have learned how to maintain that childlike spirit, and believe me, 2 grandchildren will help to keep that alive in you too. I'm a faculty member with Kaiser Institute out of Denver, and their work is directed towards the leadership of hospitals, of the medical community. And I sit with these leaders one-on-one in a private room. And we are teaching them how to get back in touch with their own instincts, their own intuitions, and how to filter in that spiritual aspect. Part of what I teach them is how to align their soul's goal with their life's purpose. We all have a purpose, but when you are not working your life's purpose and your spiritual purpose together, you're on 2 different paths. And if you feel like you're out of sync, if your life is not going exactly the way it needs to, then your life's work and your spirit work may not be flowing together. And part of what I teach is how to get that back in sync. In fact, I've even come up with a formula to teach people how to find out what their soul contract with this life is about. This may be new to you. You may not have heard this before. But when you came into this life, you had a choice. You decided this life would be exactly the way it is. But you picked 3 things. Some of you are ambitious, and so some of you would have picked a 4th thing that became part of your soul contract. And it could be as simple as unconditional love, forgiveness. It usually would come all the way down to the bottom line of simply being one word. But if you are not aware of your soul contract, chances are your life may feel a little bit out of kilter. And some of you may not have any awareness of it at all, but you're going down the road and you're doing just fine, so don't worry about that. But I must say to you that there are a lot of medical facilities, a lot of leadership in the health community today that are allowing that spiritual aspect of themselves to come more prominent. And instead of always looking at the bottom line, they are beginning to look at the whole person. And there is a big, big movement in building hospitals with complete new designs, with the colors being colors directed towards the chakra systems, the placement of rooms and windows, and the music that plays, and not just the ordinary canned music. Some of us would call it New Age or lifestyle, but it's the kind of music that holds the sacred tones. the 7 sacred tones that are the keys to all universes, all things, and all knowledge. 2 very, very effective ways if you want to help someone. Let's say you have a child that does not sleep well. One of the things that you want to look at is how much clutter is in the room where the child is sleeping. Are they sleeping on SpongeBob SquarePants or Buzz Lightyear, busy, busy, busy patterns? If they are, that busy energy may be part of why they're not sleeping well. So you'd want to take a look at that. But because I can see energy, I have spent a lot of years watching energy leaving a person's hand and going into a person's body, and I've watched how it moves. I have watched the energy of music and how certain music affects us and how certain colors affect us. And I've been working with some people that do Reiki or dentistry or some other things where people will have cloths draped over them while they're having their work. And we've been doing some wonderful experiments in allowing a person, they'll have a basket full of solid color sheets, and they are allowed to pick the color that they want draped over them when they're having the work done. And they are finding that the results are infinitely better. 2 things. Color equals vibration equals healing. Tone equals vibration equals healing. And so the kind of music that you have around a person that is either ill, comatose, has Alzheimer's, has ADD, is not sleeping well at night, the kind of music that you put around a person in those conditions can affect changes in a positive way for them. I think I elaborated a great deal on that question, but did anybody have another question that was related on anything that I've already talked about so far?
Yeah, you mentioned Kevorkian before, and it's interesting. Somebody asked me if I would help somebody pass away, and I thought, no, I don't think I could. And she said she could if she felt it was necessary. And I'd like you to say a little bit about that subject. Repeat the question, please.
She's asking, she has expressed her thoughts about assisted death and what I might feel about that. I believe that every death process has its reasons. I believe there are lessons that are occurring, lessons that are unfolding. And sometimes the lessons that are happening are not for the person dying nearly so much as it is for the person who is administering to them or who is helping them. I personally, and again, you've got to use discernment here and you've got to decide what's right and wrong for you, but I personally would not assist a person to die by giving them something, but I would assist them to die by telling them what was waiting for them, what was happening. I would open the door to the other side, and I would help them in that manner. But as far as actually assisting them to die, it's not a choice that I would make, only because of my knowledge of what happens and my understanding, and because I have watched many people die, and what I have seen is that so often it is those of us that are here that are learning the greatest lessons, that are having the best experiences. I will tell you that from where I stand and what I observe when a person is dying, that while there is some physical pain that will be associated with your death process, there can be that, or you can just simply take a breath and be gone. But for some of us that have stood by the bedsides of family members that are dying, we have seen the body contorting, we have seen it crying or moaning and groaning. And you know, I'm so thankful that I have the opportunity to stand in a different place when that event is occurring, because what I have been able to see is that the soul, the spirit that is in that body is not hurting. There is actually a death anesthesia that will kick in towards the end. When the soul starts to move in and out of the physical body, the soul is very much unaware of the pain. It may be aware that you are grieving, that you are very upset about what that body is experiencing, but they are already out of the pain part of that. But the physical body has to die. It has to go through that breaking down process. And there can be contortions and moaning and groaning and whatever. That is the nature of the physical body. But the soul itself is already separating. It's coming and it's going. And the soul does not feel that. In fact, the soul is already seeing through that veil that divides our worlds, that veil that is so very, very thin and almost impenetrable until it's your time to go. That veil is already parting for them. They're beginning to see beyond the veil. And that's why so many people will report glorious experiences. They will hear music, they will see people, they will laugh and have conversations with people that you don't see, and you're looking up into the corner of the room thinking, I think they flipped out before they died. They're already moving into that other realm. Let me just say that it's not a decision that I would personally make to give drugs or medication to end a life, because what I understand is that even our death process is part of what our plan is. Although I know that if a person has AIDS or some chronic illness that is robbing the family of all of the money, and that sometimes a soul will very selflessly make a decision to end their life in the thought process that they're probably making things better for their family. I realize that if a person should end their own life, they have set up a precedence that is going to be continued in that family. That legacy of suicide will continue. And they have ended lessons and created another set of lessons. So there are things to be learned at all times through all phases of death. But the soul in itself, the actual act of dying, is very painless. There's no pain to it. In fact, it's very glorious, and in most cases, it's quite a homecoming and quite exciting. Let me tell you, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you if you'd comment a little bit more when you said you can see the purpose, or in the Akashic records, of the Twin Towers coming down, or Columbine.
Okay, she's wanting to know if I would elaborate a little bit more on looking into the Akashic records and trying to find the understanding of why the Twin Towers came down or why events such as Columbine happened. Let me not belabor that point a lot, but if we have time, I'm, again, from the South, we love to talk. So once you get me wound up, it's hard to slow me down, and I'll talk on. And somebody's going to have to keep me on cue, and there's so many things that I want to share with you that I don't want to stay too long in any one place. So if I don't say enough about it, I'm going to address it a little bit really quickly, but I'm not going to go into as much detail as I would if we had perhaps several hours to talk. Let me say this about any of these major events. Now, this may be real hard to believe, but every single one of these major catastrophes that have occurred, even down to the tsunami, have been by design and by choice. They have been contracted to serve a purpose that is higher and greater than most of us could begin to understand. And each soul that is involved in it, and I know if one of you lost a person in one of the Twin Towers, you're not going to buy what I'm saying, because you will feel the physical loss of that loved one, and you're just not going to buy that that person made a deal to be there that day. You're not going to buy that, and I understand that. That is a normal, healthy grief process, and you're entitled to it, and you need to go through it. But if you could get out of the box, and if you could look at it from a bigger place, you would understand that each of the souls that were there, that lost their life at that time, had a passion for world peace and world unity and humanity. And they knew that an event such as that would be of epic proportion, that it would wrap around the world, and that there would be very few people that could miss that event. And you know, when it happened, all of a sudden it wasn't just the United States. We really were united. It really was a United States. But what was even more incredible than that was that people in England were stopping and grieving. People all over the world came together in their own way. And it served a purpose as painful and as wrong as it seems and as devastating as it seems. It served a purpose that is so much bigger than most of us could even begin to understand. Such was the case of Columbine. By design, by contract, that event occurred. And again, if you lost a child there, I know that what I'm saying would not make sense, and you would argue with me all day long, and you would be entitled to when I tell you that the perpetrators were not dark and evil souls. They were actually very highly evolved souls that took upon themselves the most horrendous of lifestyles in order to fulfill an event that would reach around the world and help to wake us up. And that event was not much about guns. That was the smallest part of what that event was about. It was more about the decay of moral fiber in our homes and our communities, and how many of us are leaving our kids, and we have more and more latchkey kids, and we're not paying attention, and we didn't know that our child was in trouble. We are not paying attention. We don't know what they're doing online. It's a lot about how out of touch we are and how much we are letting go of our moral and parental and community responsibilities. So there are bigger, deeper causes, and I could take each of those if we had time, and if we have time towards the end, we may even do that with some of it, but we can go in and we can examine it. And as I said, I don't expect you to agree. I expect you to use discernment and say, well, she's from the South and she's a little bit crazy. That's okay. I would just encourage you to look at it from a different perspective. Be willing to examine it from another purpose. And be willing to validate each of those lives by saying, wow, isn't it interesting in all of that tragedy that that life could have served a purpose so high, so great, so extraordinary, that I cannot even begin to understand it. Was there a hand over here?
My daughter, who's now graduated from college, and she's living in New York, when she was very, very young, she had a playmate, and an invisible playmate. And I didn't know at the time what I know now, and I discouraged. She's highly intuitive, but she's turned it off. Is there any way that I can help her without interfering in her life? But,
Here's a wonderful father who admits that he discouraged a child about her invisible playmates, and he thinks that he helped to turn that off, and he says further that his daughter is very, very intuitive, and what he wants to know is there anything he can do to encourage her. Wow. Isn't that wonderful? That he would even be in that space and consider that. You know what? Go to the bookstore, or maybe even out here, and find a book. And here's how I would approach it. I would pray or I would meditate about this, and I would say something on the order of, okay, Father, it's time for me to turn this around. What I'd like to know is what can I do to make up for what I might have done, or to encourage this daughter and open that doorway of communication between us. And I would buy a book, and I would ask that I be led to the correct book. And if you read the book before you give it, that's even better. But write a simple little note in the front of it that says, I found this to be so intriguing, and I'm wondering what you think. You give it back to her, the ability to come back to you and realize that it's safe and okay to speak about intuitive things. But don't worry about what you did or didn't do. It all worked out by design. And had it not been you discouraging her in some way, it would have been life or society or some other thing that would have allowed her to grow even more just by having that little bit of a challenge. So get over it, okay? No big deal. But if you give her a gift back that opens the doorway, I think that would be an extraordinary gift. Let me tell you a little, okay.
Yeah, very quickly. The intuition. How do you know if it's coming from your higher self or from your guides?
If you are getting information from your higher self, it's usually going to be along the lines of what you're working on and what you're looking at, but it's going to be clear, unbiased, non-judgmental, non-emotional. Whereas with a guide, a lot of times a guide is very emotionally vested in you. They don't want to hurt you. They don't want to harm you. They try to say it to you in a softer, more gentle way, and they might walk around it a little bit as they're trying to get the information to you. On the other hand, your higher self is part of you, and if it knows that you need to get your butt up out of the bed and get to work, it simply will say it that way. Whereas a guide might say, gosh, I wonder how the traffic is today. We really have to do our hair today? It starts finding ways to excuse what you're already choosing to do anyway. Does that help you understand that? It's more clear, more precise, non-emotional, non-judgmental when it comes from your own higher self. But if it's coming from an external and outside, it may come from emotions. It may have a bias. It may have other motives behind it. Okay? Let me move on. Am I seeing the clock correctly? Are we? Wow.
4:30.
Let me tell you about helping my father die. I think you'll find this story is very interesting. As a little girl, when I was born, as I started having any thought process, any recollections about anything at all, I knew that I had been born to help my father die. Now, I'm a little girl, and I don't even know what that word means. I don't have a clue about what it means. But it was knowledge that came with me so that I would never step away from it. Did not know what that would be for me. All of my life, though, I continued to know that I was supposed to help my father die. We all grow up. We all move to all of our various places. We all have our children. Daddy's getting older, always a very strong, very proud man. Never knew anything about my gift or my ability until one day we had a family reunion. And the younger generation had sort of separated itself off from the older generation. And what I found very interesting was the younger generation started talking about spiritual matters. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this is interesting. So I'm sitting there with my head down just trying to listen but not be a part of what was happening until my niece says, Aunt Judy, what do you think? And so I answered the question and got out of the conversation. Until the next thing I know, every question that came up was directed to Aunt Judy. And then the next thing you know, I'm doing a mini lecture. And the next thing you know is, I don't know when to hush. Well, I finally took a deep breath and became silent for only a moment. Got up and took my plate and was going to go into the kitchen. And as I turned around, my father was standing at the doorway. You don't want to know exactly what I was thinking. I thought I was in deep something. I walked by my father and he put his hand out and he stopped me and he said, Judy. Yes, Daddy? He said, I guess I never really knew who you were, did I? And I said, no, Daddy, you didn't. And that's all that ever passed between us in our entire lives, of him having any knowing or any reckoning that I might be a little out of the ordinary, or I might have a glimpse into another world. So nothing was ever spoken, nothing was ever said. He had no knowledge at all. So life goes on, and my father has Alzheimer's. And before Daddy died, we had really effectively lost him. I'm thinking maybe anywhere between 5 and 7 years before Daddy actually physically died. We had lost all contact with Daddy. He had no conversation with us. He didn't speak to us. He could not engage. He would have flare-ups. We kept him at home. We hired people 24 hours a day to be there with him. He had worked hard all of his life. He certainly was entitled to have the best of care in an environment that was comfortable to him, as long as we were able to do that for him. So we had gone probably 5 full years and never had had a conversation with Daddy at all. And all of the children wound up being at home one weekend. They all went in, after we had eaten our meal, they all went into the kitchen and they were cleaning up the kitchen and they said, Judy, You go sit with Daddy. You're better with him than we are. Yeah, right. That's a nice way to push it off, don't you think? Well, I went into the living room and I sat with Daddy. Now, the interesting thing about me is that while Daddy had been locked away in that quiet place in his mind, I had always been able to see his soul, and I had been watching what he was doing. So I was not concerned at all about him. And I had even been having a level of conversation with my father off and on. But on that particular day, when they swore up and down to me they'd rather be doing dishes than anything else, it's a laugh. It was not like the days when we were growing up, I can tell you. So I went into the living room and I sat down with my father. He was in his favorite recliner, and I sat on a little footstool that was close by, and I simply reached over and I just patted his knee for a little bit and didn't say a word because there were no words necessary. We're going to stop there, but don't let me forget exactly where I'm at. Akashic record. It's like, you might hear people say the good book. You know, it's referred to in a lot of different ways, but are we ready to roll?
Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead.
The Akashic record is very much like the book of record, and when I have stood and watched it, literally I have seen words unraveling and coming off the pages, and words coming on the pages based on a person's activity. Like if I were looking at Diane's life and I were in the Akashic record and some events were occurring in her life, I would see those either coming onto the page or unraveling and going off the page. It's the place where all of the records that relate to Diane are kept. Not just this life, but every life she's ever had. And sometimes where those lives are leading her. So there will be some future events that will be there sometimes too. Okay, so we're back in Southeast Georgia. It's Sunday afternoon. We've had a great dinner. The kids are lying through their teeth saying they'd love to do the dishes, but nonetheless they're in there. And I'm sitting with Daddy. No words are spoken. And we have not had a word out of my father for about 5 years. I reached over and just simply patted him on the knee and said nothing. And all of a sudden, my daddy turned around and he looked at me and he said, you know, I haven't always been a good man. And I'm thinking, oh my God, Daddy's talking and I'm trying to get the attention of everybody in the kitchen, and they're having such fun doing the dishes, they're not paying me any mind. And then I realized that what was happening had nothing whatsoever to do with them, that this was something for Daddy. And so I just let it go. And I looked at Daddy and I said, I know, Daddy. But I said, it's okay. He looked at me. No conversation now for 5 years, right? The veil parts and all of a sudden he's lucid and he's talking. He said, you know, he said, I'm going to be going home soon. I said, I know, Daddy. He said, but I don't rightly know the way home. I don't know how to get there. And I said, Daddy, don't worry about it, because the closer you get, the way will be very clear. You'll know and you'll have the help that you need. He said, okay, that's good. He said, well, and he hung his head down. He was feeling pretty bad about this one. He said, you know, I didn't always listen to that Jesus stuff. I said, I know, Daddy, but it's okay. He said, do you think so? I said, yeah, Daddy. He said, well, now how do you figure that? I said, Daddy, when you weren't listening, he always was. It's okay. He said, okay. The curtains closed. My daddy was gone again, never to say another word at all. That was the last conversation. Daddy actually lived on for a little bit longer, and for me to get home from Columbus, Georgia, over to Waycross and Alma would be about a 4-hour drive. And one day I woke up and I said, oh, I need to go home right now. And I called my daughter and I said, Nikki, you need to make your plans. We need to go. Granddaddy's about to pass. And I went on, and as it turned out, and remember, the little girl all of her life has known she's supposed to help her daddy die. I had forgotten it, but the knowing was always there. Did not know what it meant, but it was always there. I went home, and as it turns out, the last night of my father's life in this physical realm, I was the only person with him. I held his hands, I patted his hands, I put lotion on his hands, lotion on his feet, I talked to him, I sang. That's probably what slipped him on over the edge. I did all the daughterly things that I thought that I could do to make him feel comfortable. Well, I also talked to him, but I talked out loud. I didn't just rely on that mental connection that we had had for years. I'd always been able to communicate with Daddy that way. I talked out loud to him and I said, Daddy, you don't have to be afraid. I can take your fear. I can take your pain. You've got to trust me that I know what I'm doing and that it won't hurt me. But I cannot do this if you do not allow me. You have to make a conscious decision for me to help you in your passing. And I said that to him over and over, all night long. The next day, that morning, in the corner of the room, his mother and father, who had been dead they had passed over probably 40 some odd years earlier, long time he'd been without his parents. And they walked through the wall, literally, full form, walked through the wall. They looked at me and they just nodded to me. They weren't there for me and they weren't going to have a conversation with me, but they did acknowledge me. And I tapped Daddy's feet and I said, Daddy, it's a good day to die. Your mother and Daddy are here now. In a little while, Daddy had been laying there comatose. His eyes had been in a fixed stare. He had not blinked them. He couldn't talk. He hadn't talked. He could not move. He was completely motionless. And as it was getting time, I had called the other children and I had told them they needed to get there, that Daddy would be leaving soon. My daughter had arrived. She came in and she was on my father's right side holding his right hand, and I was on his left side holding his left hand. When all of a sudden I had a jolt of electricity run straight up through my body, so much so that it almost knocked me backwards, and I screamed. And my daughter said, Mom, are you okay? And I said, I'm fine. I'll tell you about it in just a minute. And when the jolt of electricity ran up my arm, my daddy, for the first time in days and maybe longer, he blinked his eyes and he turned his head over and he looked up at me and he started to try to speak. And as he did, his soul left his body and went straight through me. And in microseconds, I became my father's filtering system. I felt every feeling, every emotion that my father had. I felt his pain, his shame, his guilt, his pride. I felt all the things that my father had experienced in all of his life. And the last thing that I felt as my father passed through my body is I felt his absolute amazement at what was happening, and that I literally had taken it, and that I was okay. And for the first time in his life, he was allowed to see me for who I am. And I got to tell you, it's not this. And his excitement at leaving and joining his family. My daughter told me later that the night before Granddaddy died, she had had a vision, not a dream, a vision. A dream is something you can orchestrate. It's because it's too much beer, too much pizza, a long day at work or whatever, and you get into it and you can kind of work things out and you can move it around and orchestrate it and do a lot of things with it. But a vision, you cannot do that. A vision you can see, feel, touch, smell, taste, but you can't change it. You cannot tell it how it is going to go. It is what it is, and it is revealing itself to you for a reason. But my daughter had a vision, and she saw her grandfather leaving. And she saw his soul leave his body and go and stand on a tall sailing ship and sailing off across the water, off literally into the sunset. That gave her peace. That let her know that her grandfather was okay. So that was how she knew how to get through the process. I very often have had people ask me, well, how long since your father died? When did he die? And do you know, meaning no disrespect to my father, and he certainly does understand this. I can't remember. I don't know. Because I don't celebrate that death. You know how some of us can tell you the day, the moment, the hour, the second that a person died? Because somehow they see it as a separation and a finality. I don't see it that way. It was a day of absolute rejoicing for my father the day he went home. I can't remember the day, but I can remember the time perfectly. But don't ask me what day it was. I don't remember. I don't celebrate it in that way. Very, very quickly, going back to my own near-death experience, I'm going to try to do this very quickly. 7 surgeries, 7 years. My body went into cardiac arrest. I had had a premonition about this event. I knew that something was going to happen, and I had told my husband that if anything happened, to bring my daughter Nikki into the room, because she was the one that I was most concerned about. To bring her into the room and put her hand in mine, and I would find a way to let her know that I was okay. Well, as it turned out, I did go into cardiac arrest. I was clinically dead for 7 minutes, and then later lay in a coma for 7 days. At one point, when Mike finally came in and brought Nikki in, when they really thought that I was not going to make it. An interesting thing that you might want to know about this is that while I was in a coma, I could hear everything that was being said around me. I knew every word, every footstep, every time they came, and when the alarms would go off, and every time they came in and administered to my body in some way, I knew every bit of that. But I had no concept of hot or cold. I had no concept of time. I didn't know I'd been there that long. Didn't know what time of year it was. There was no concept of anything other than I was very, very peaceful. I was very calm. I was not at all distressed that I knew that that physical body was lying there, hooked up to a machine that kept the alarms kept going off. I was not at all concerned about it. Well, Mike came in and he brought Nikki in, and he put her hand in mine, and he said, "Your mother said to say this to you." He said, "She will find a way to let you know that she's okay." And I'm laying there completely motionless with all kinds of instruments and things hooked up to me. The hardest thing I've ever done in my life was to move that thumb just a little bit so that when Nikki's hand was in mine that I could squeeze her little thumb just a little bit. And when I did, she started crying, and I started crying, and that's what brought me back from my adventure. So, see, though I didn't know the whole journey and the whole story, I had already built into place something that was going to pull me back from a place that I probably didn't want to be pulled back from, but I knew I had to. As my event began unfolding, I had an aunt, Aunt Vera, one of the dearest and sweetest persons in our family. She was the Florence Nightingale to us all. Taught me how to make fried apple pies, a legacy that I have already taught my grandchildren. You've never seen a kitchen until you have had a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old with aprons that go down beyond the floor, and they're on their little stool, and they're with little glasses with flour all over everything, rolling out these little canned biscuits and putting in apples in and then taking forks and crimping the edges. Now, that's a mess. That's a labor of love, I've got to tell you, but you know, this is a tradition they plan to carry on. Well, that's something that Aunt Vera had taught me. As my event was unfolding, Aunt Vera came to me. Beautiful head of white hair, crimson red dress. Never thought I'd ever see the day that Aunt Vera would be in a bright red dress, but by golly, she was there that way that day. She was so close in my face that I kept thinking, I wish you'd back off just a wee bit. She didn't. And she talked to me fast and furious and never let me ask a question, never let me say a word to her. Well, she wasn't supposed to, because she was talking me through my passage. Now, some of us will go through the tunnel. Some will see the lights. As I said very early on, each of your experiences will be just exactly what it's supposed to be. Well, this is how mine is, because by nature, in spirit, because I can move around in ways that other people cannot, if I get curious about a thing, I go check it out. And they didn't want me checking anything out. So Aunt Vera kept me occupied. After a while, everything went black. The next thing I knew, the next thing that I realized, I was in another place as real as everything is real here. But the air that I was breathing was more sweet. It was more clear. The sounds that I heard were like melodies. The birds, the animals, the children playing, the adults that were talking. All of the activities, all of the things that were going on, it was just like sweet music. It was like being at home, very clear. And when I came to, I was on my knees outside, very aware of the grass and dirt and pebbles and all the things that you would find on the ground. And I was at someone's feet. I was looking down at these feet that were wearing sandals. And I wondered whose feet they were. And I have explained this to other people. My religious experience would be that it was Christ. Your religious experience could be that it would be Muhammad or Allah or whomever. Whatever your experience requires, that is what you will have. But for me, I came to on the other side, kneeling outside at the feet of Christ. And he leaned down and he wanted me to stand up, help me to stand up. And he wanted me to look at him, which I said, I am so unworthy. And he took his hand and he put his hand under my chin and raised my face so that I had to look at him. And when I did, I looked into the bluest eyes I've ever seen. And in those eyes was love, compassion, understanding, all of the things that are hard for us to describe here. And though I was clinically dead for 7 minutes here, on the other side there is no such thing as time. And we walked and we talked for months. As I went around and I saw beautiful crystal cathedrals, as I saw beautiful homes, as I saw schools, as I saw the place where people go before they are born in this life again, as they are making their contracts and their decisions to come back, I went back and everything was reiterated. And I knew I had to come back. I knew that my journey was not over. There was no question about that. Long story, and there's a lot that I'm missing here, and perhaps we'll have another day and another time to get into this a little deeper. But anyway, the thing that finally brought me back from that journey was when Nikki's hand was put in mine, and I squeezed her thumb, and all of a sudden, I was back. Many, many years later, I am living in Columbus, Georgia, working with a young woman that had been traumatized every way in her life that a human being could be traumatized. And the lady that called me wanted me to work with her and asked me if I would, and I agreed to do so. And in working with her, I started hearing stories about a man that walked up and down the street close to the little poodle grooming shop where she was living in one room. And it was a black man that would usually have 4 or 5 dogs walking behind him. He was walking up and down a 6-lane highway, a road that fed into one of the most affluent parts of town. This black man had a walkie-talkie that had no batteries, no innards, nothing to it, no mechanics to it at all. But he was forever talking into that walkie-talkie and looking up into the sky, saying 10-4, 10-4. So he got the nickname of 10-4, and that's what everybody always called him, was 10-4. He had on a hat that had an antenna on the hat. If you ever got close to him, he had the worst case of BO you've ever had in your entire life. Usually would smell like he had been drinking. So he was a person that would be an outcast of society in many, many ways. And yet, what I began to discern about what I was hearing from this, though I'd never met him, I was discerning that 10-4 was an opportunity for people to know themselves. Because as people were walking up and down the road, he would wave at them, and some people would look the other way or up in the sky. Some people would go get a hamburger and bring it back to him. He was an opportunity for you to know something about yourself. If you judged him, that's who you were. If you waved back and wished him well, that's who you were. Well, on one of the trips that I made to go by and check on this young woman that I'd been working with, She was in the back, and I was waiting out in the front part of the building. And all of a sudden, the front door is thrown open, and guess who walks in? 10-4, you're right. His B.O. preceded him. And as he walked in, he came straight for me. And he put his arms around me and put a bear hug on me that I could barely breathe, barely stand. And in that moment, I had a chance to know something about myself. And what I did is I gathered up all of the love that I could get, and energetically, from my heart to his heart, I sent him nothing but unconditional, unlimited love. As I did, he stepped back away from me. He looked me in the eyes with the bluest eyes I'd ever seen, winked at me, and turned around and walked out. Life is for living. Life is not for dying. Some of you are ill now. Some of you know that you're going to die sooner than some of us. And yet, none of us have that written guarantee that says we may not go out there today and say goodbye to this physical world. So we don't really know when we're going. But your life is a gift. It is a precious, precious gift. And it is for living. If you have 5 days, you have a moral obligation to your physical body to live for 5 days. There is so much that you can do in 5 days. Well, you could pick up the phone and call me and we'd talk about it. I'd be so excited. I'd pave the way for you. I'd get the skids oiled up really good so that you could slide in. And I'd help you if I could. Had a little friend that was in the hospital that was dying, and I would go in and out of the hospital to visit her. And as I was going down the hallway to visit her, to help her die, got a mind of its own, I would walk by this room, and this old gentleman, screaming, moaning, groaning, so bad that none of the nurses would come anymore. They knew he was okay, but he was just screaming. No family ever visiting. There was not a soul that ever came to see that poor old man. And I'd been in and out of the hospital several times to visit my little friend to help her prepare to die. And I had passed him and had observed and found out what was going on until finally that day I said, you know, I got to stop. And I went in and I walked over and I put my hand on him and I touched him, and I swear I think I probably would have scared him. He probably had an NDE at that moment. He probably bounced over and came back because nobody had been in and touched him in that way at all. And he was very quiet, and I talked to him and I said, please, please don't be afraid. There is no reason for you to be afraid. And I said, you are not alone. And I told him about some of the things that I was seeing around him. I told him there was an angel standing on either side of the head of his bed. And he listened to me. And I said, you don't have to worry. I'm going to help you. Be careful what you say, folks. You're going to have to honor it, okay? Not necessarily in the manner in which you think you're going to help somebody sometimes. So the next day, as I was coming for the last trip for my little friend because she was ready to go, as I walked by his room, and by the way, he never screamed or never cried again after that. There was no more screaming, no more tears. He was okay. The nurses came running down to the room. They thought he had died, but he was still alive. So the next day, as I was going in to make the last journey to see my little friend and to tell her it was okay to go, as I walked by his room, the man went into cardiac arrest. I took the full impact and was slammed to the floor. I told him I'd help. I wasn't sure I'd help that much, but anyway, I took the full impact, and that gentleman at that time, he crossed over, but I had contracted with him to help him. And he died very peacefully, and he was not alone, and he knew he was not alone. Life is for living. Live it to the fullest. allow your intuitive capacity to grow. Allow yourself to know who you are, to remember who you are. You are infinitely spiritual and powerful beings. You are incredibly wonderful. Even as I look out right now, I look and I see all these little pockets of energies, and I don't see you the way you see you. I see like these little stars. Like there's one man sitting over here, he's got a profusion of colors coming out of him. It's like a rainbow. And you've got different colors coming from you, and that's who I'm seeing. I'm seeing the true you, your spiritual self. That soul, that Father, the Creator, what He sees in you. And for all the pain that you have, for all the things that hurt your life, I am so sorry. But you know, I respect you so much more than you could understand, because I know that whatever pain you had, you chose it. Because you were very wise, and you were very smart, and you said, yeah, I can do that. Famous last words. Because you had a chance to see this life before you came down. And you decided what you would do, what you would achieve, what would happen. You saw all the eventual possibilities that could come out of it, and you said, yes, that appears that I can accomplish what I want to do in my lifetime. Now, free will reigns supreme at all times, which means that once you get here, you can do it or not do it. You can do it to whatever degree you want to do it. Well, now, the bad news is that you're so smart and you're so cool, and you're up there and you're making these choices and these decisions, and you're going to live this life, and you're going to do all these wonderful things, and then you're getting ready to go down and play a game of chutes and ladders, and you're going down the slippery slope headed for that body. And somebody says, by the way, you'll forget. As you slide on into home plate, you come in not remembering, not knowing. Because if you had the answers, you wouldn't take the test and you wouldn't do the deeds. But may I say, I respect you so, so much for the challenges that you have chosen. Some of you have had near-death experiences. Some of you have had knowing out-of-body experiences. Some of you think you've had nothing at all, and yet every night of your life, every single night of your life, every one of you, with no exception, have been out of body. Oh, now there's a weird one. You know, when you wake up with that sudden start like that sometimes, that's when your soul slips back into your body. And none of you are alone. I cannot tell you that every one of you has an angel. I cannot tell you that every one of you has a spirit guide, or that there's 30 people around you or 16 people around you. I cannot tell you that we all have that many, but what I can say, 100% confidential, is that none of you are alone. And no one dies alone. No one. And you will start seeing through the veil before you go. And the death anesthesia will kick in. And while the body may be contorting, it may be screaming, it may be moaning, the soul will be set free. And you will fly like a dove. And you will be held in the arms of those that love you, that wait for you. And you'll be like my grandmother. You'll go through whatever your experience is that you need, and then you'll get there and you'll say, whoa, can't believe I did that. Whew. I'm not going to do that again. And then some time in the future, you'll start feeling really good about how much you've grown, and the loved ones you left behind, and the world, and all the things you might could do, and you'll go back and you'll make another choice to go back again. Now, how many of you have said, this is my last time? I'll tell you one thing, I'm not coming back. You'll probably be the first ones out. It is a profound experience and a profound gift, this life of yours. Life is for living, not for dying. May I say, that this day you have brought new meaning into my life. It has been an extraordinary privilege and honor to stand in your presence and to see your energy, to see your light, and to see the greatness within each of you. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judy. What a wonderful gift to have her here today. Don't forget that next month we're having Dr. Roby Rogers, a medical doctor from the University of Wisconsin in Madison, who had a near-death experience about 3 years ago and has dramatically changed the way she practices medicine as a result. Please join us at that time. And don't forget to pick up your stuff.
Never get one yet. And you're actually here.
For here, I think there might be one day in Naperville, if you're willing to drive, is it down to Naperville or over to Naperville? I'm not sure where I'm at, but I think there might be some time. But if you really are interested in an appointment, go to my website, it's judygoodman.com, you can do it over the phone, that way you'll be in your pajamas and nobody will ever know. Thanks, Judy.
Give me an appointment with her.
What?
Give me an appointment with her.
We're full.
We're full?
We booked them all up.
No kidding. As of
Okay.
when?
As of about a week.